remember the sound of the mop on my first night working the cruise ship. Not just the sound itself, but the way it carried. A flat, squeaking hush, followed by a hollow drip into the bucket, then the faint vibration of the handle as if the steel walls themselves were tuning forks. The ship amplified everything. It swallowed noise but also stretched it, made footsteps seem farther away or closer than they really were. Even then, before anything happened, it unsettled me. I thought maybe I was just tired, or maybe it was something about being surrounded by miles of ocean in every direction. I didn't know yet that the ship itself was going to peel me open, strip me down to the bone. A year before that, my wife had left me. Ex-wife, technically, but I didn't get used to the word. We'd been together 7 years, married for 4, and when she left, it was like waking up in a house where all the furniture had been rearranged. Nothing violent, just unfamiliar, wrong in a way I couldn't fix. She said she needed someone who could be present. I had been working 60-hour weeks at a warehouse, nights mostly, trying to save up for something. A house, maybe. A future. It all bled together. The day she left, I came home to find 3 empty hangers swinging in the closet, the sound of their metal hooks clicking softly like mocking laughter. After that, I drifted. My apartment became a tomb of cardboard boxes I didn't unpack and dishes I didn't wash. I told myself I was surviving, but really, I was rotting. So when I saw an ad for janitorial positions on a cruise line, good pay, long contracts, meals included, I applied. I wasn't looking for adventure. I wanted something with structure, repetition, a job where the hours themselves could act as a barrier between me and my thoughts. At first, that's what it was. Step, swish, ring, step, swish, ring. The mop became my metronome, my penance. The ship was alive around me, humming and vibrating, its belly full of laughter, music, glasses clinking. I stayed out of it. I stayed invisible. A janitor's uniform is a kind of shield. You blend into the background. Guests look through you. Crew members nod and move on. I could disappear without leaving. But the sea doesn't let you disappear. At night, walking the upper decks, the horizon was a black seam stitched into the sky. The ocean had no edges, no bottom, no end. Just the hum of the ship and the slow churn of water. It got inside my head. I started noticing little things. A door closing a few seconds too late after I walked past. Lights flickering not in the usual stutter, but in patterns, like someone trying to blink messages at me. My reflection in the chrome panels, familiar, but softer around the edges, as if the metal wasn't sure it wanted to hold my shape. That was when I met him. It was the 4th night of a 10-day Caribbean run. I was assigned to late duties, wiping down railings and emptying bins along deck 7. That deck was quiet at night, passengers in bed, the hum of the ship steady and low. Near the back, where the wind carried the smell of salt and engine oil, I saw him. A man in a deck chair, thin and pale, his face tilted toward the water. He looked so still I thought at first he was asleep or sick. "You work nights?" His voice startled me, not just because he spoke, but because it was soft, muffled like sound traveling through fog. "Yeah," I said, gripping the mop handle a little tighter. He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed on the horizon, which was nothing but black. "I'm writing a book," he said, "about isolation, at sea." That was it. No name, no small talk, just that. I don't know why I answered. Maybe because he seemed lonelier than me. "What kind of book?" "Observational, about how being surrounded by people is sometimes the loneliest thing." He said it with no inflection, like a fact he'd rehearsed. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. The wind shifted, carrying a smell like wet iron. Over the next few nights, I kept running into him. Sometimes in the same chair, sometimes by the vending machines. Once near a supply closet I was unlocking. Always late. Always quiet. His name, eventually, was Drew. He said it almost reluctantly, like giving it away was a mistake. He asked questions. Not the kind of questions people usually ask. where you're from, how long you've been on board, but precise, pointed ones. What was my schedule? Did I like the uniform? Did the master badge I carried really open every non-passenger door? He asked with a crooked smile, almost playful, but his eyes didn't match. They stayed flat, watchful. I should have known. The way he leaned in, the way he remembered details I barely remembered telling him, the way he studied me. But I was grateful for the company. It was nice to hear my own name spoken aloud by someone other than a supervisor barking orders. Then one night I passed deck 7 and he wasn't there. The chair was empty. I shrugged it off. But the next night he wasn't there either. Nor the next. And that was when I opened my locker and froze. My uniform was gone, my master badge too. Panic spread cold through me. Without those, I wasn't just useless, I was suspect. On a ship, your badge is proof of existence. Without it, you're nothing. I reported it immediately, heart-hammering, but security was dismissive. They looked at me like I was a screw-up. "We'll issue a replacement," they said, and they did. But it was restricted. No engine access, no staff-only decks, no storage rooms. Doors I'd opened for weeks now rejected me with red lights and beeps. Worse, the crew avoided me. Conversations stopped when I walked into the mess. Laughter dimmed. I had become visible, but in the wrong way, like a contaminant. 2 nights later, security summoned me. They had footage. Someone had tried to enter the engine room with a master-level badge. "We thought you'd want to see this," the head guard said, sliding the monitor toward me. My throat closed. The footage showed a man in my uniform, badge clipped neatly on the front. Same build, same walk. He moved down the hall with calm certainty, and when he turned toward the camera, I felt the blood drain from my face. It was Drew, but not quite. He had shaved, altered himself, just enough to look like me. In grainy footage, it was me. It was undeniable. The guard leaned back. "That's you, right?" "No." The word tore out too fast, too sharp. "That's not me." "Then who?" I opened my mouth, but my mind stuttered. Because suddenly I couldn't picture Drew clearly. His jaw, his eyes, even his voice. It all blurred, slippery in my memory. Like he'd never been there at all. Security searched his cabin. It was spotless. Not messy, not abandoned. Empty. Sheets flat, drawers bare. No booking under his name. No ID. No record of him ever boarding. It was as if Drew had never existed. I tried to finish the contract, swallowing paranoia like medicine. But little things gnawed at me. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps behind me in empty corridors, a cough in a supply closet that turned out to be bare, reflections in the glass panels that didn't quite sync with my movements, lagging a fraction behind. One night I dreamt of Drew sitting in the deck chair again. Only when he turned to me, his face was mine. I woke up with the sheets twisted around my neck like a noose. Weeks later, back in Tampa, I got a letter from the DMV. My license had been suspended due to a DUI arrest in Oregon. I'd never been to Oregon. The mugshot attached was blurry, but my stomach clenched. It looked like Drew, or like me, half distorted. A face caught mid-transformation. After that, things bled together. A bill from a bank I'd never opened an account with. A voicemail from a woman I didn't know, calling me by name, asking why I hadn't shown up. A neighbor waving to me on the street, but when I waved back, her smile froze, confused, as if she realized mid-gesture I wasn't the man she thought. I started changing ships every contract. I hid my badge on a chain under my uniform, checked my locker 3 times a night. I thought that would keep me safe. But safety was the wrong word. The truth was, I wasn't afraid of losing things anymore. I was afraid of being replaced. Sometimes, standing on the deck at night, the ocean spread endless and black around me. I swear I feel him. Not watching me, becoming me. Walking another deck, on another ship, wearing another face. And when I look in mirrors too long, under those buzzing fluorescent lights, I feel my reflection hesitate, lagging half a breath behind like it's waiting for me to slip, so it can take over. I don't fear Drew. I fear the possibility that Drew was never someone else. I fear he was always me, and that I was the copy all along. The first thing I remember about that trip wasn't the ocean, or the size of the ship, or even the relief of stepping away from my desk after weeks of grinding myself into the shape of a half-human machine. What I remember is the sound, a faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to follow me from the airport shuttle to the ship itself, a vibration low enough to make my chest feel hollow but not quite audible to anyone else. I chalked it up to exhaustion, the product of too much caffeine, too little sleep, and the strained nerves of someone whose body had been living in fight-or-flight mode for too long. But even as I stood on the open deck, watching the Miami skyline shrink behind us, I couldn't shake the sense that the hum was inside me, vibrating behind my ribs like a second heartbeat, steady and dissonant. The cruise was supposed to be an escape. That was the mantra I'd repeated to myself when I booked the ticket in a fit of desperation. 60-hour work weeks had turned my life into a dull gray blur of glowing screens, endless Slack notifications, and the constant buzzing of my phone. My left eye had started twitching whenever I heard a ping, a little involuntary spasm that made me feel like a puppet whose strings were being tugged by an unseen hand. I told myself I needed space, silence, the ocean, and when I stumbled across the last-minute deal, 7 nights, Miami to San Juan to Barbados and back, I convinced myself that solitude at sea was exactly what I needed. My brother Liam was the only person I told, along with the one coworker I trusted enough to cover for me. I didn't want anyone else knowing where I was going. That part I realize now was instinctual, a retreat into anonymity. My cabin was on the lower deck, not far from the waterline. Compact, utilitarian, but fine for one person. The bed was firm, the sheets scratchy but clean. A circular porthole looked out onto the dark, rolling water, and the bathroom surprised me. A heavy, inward-swinging door, thick wood with a brass handle, like it had been salvaged from some older era of shipbuilding. I ran my hand along the frame the first night, feeling the resistance of the latch as it clicked shut. Solid, secure. Yet at 3:15 in the morning I woke to the sound of it creaking open. It was not a quick swing. The door moved slowly, deliberately, as though someone were on the other side easing it open with care. My first thought was that I'd failed to close it all the way, though I distinctly remembered the firm click of the latch. The ship's constant motion might explain it, I told myself. Pressure. Shifts in balance. Nothing sinister. Still, when the door inched open a fraction further, my pulse quickened. I got up, shoved a folded towel under the base, and pushed the door shut again. That should hold it. The next night, the same thing happened. 3:15 a.m., almost on the dot. The door creaked, the towel bunched, and the wood sighed open with an excruciating slowness that raised every hair on my arms. I sat up in bed, watching it, daring myself to cross the room and slam it shut. But I couldn't bring myself to move until it was already wide enough that the dark bathroom beyond seemed like a gaping mouth. No sound, no footsteps, just the yawning black rectangle. In the morning, I checked the hinges, tested the latch. It held firm when I tugged it. Frustrated, I called maintenance. That's how I met Mateo. Young, wiry, with the kind of tan that comes from years at sea. He unscrewed the hinges, checked the frame, swung the door open and shut a dozen times. Finally, he shook his head and said, "Too stiff to open on its own. You'd have to push it." His tone was casual, but the look he gave me was too quick, too sharp, as if he were gauging my reaction. I laughed it off, muttering something about paranoia, and he left with a shrug. But the unease stayed. By the third night, unease gave way to something else. Obsession. I set up my phone, angled it toward the bathroom door, hit record, and lay back in bed, eyes half closed, feigning sleep. The towel was wedged tight. The latch was double-checked. I forced myself not to intervene, no matter what. At 3:16, Right on schedule, the door began to move. Slowly, grinding, opening into shadow. My heart thundered so loudly I was sure it would be on the audio track. I clenched my fists, stayed still, waited. And then something new. The mirror above the sink caught the light just enough to reflect part of the cabin. For a fraction of a second, the reflection showed something that shouldn't have been there. A man. Tall, gaunt, dressed in a formal suit. His arms were too long, his head tilted at an impossible angle, like it was hanging by a thread. He stood behind the bed where I lay, perfectly still, not blurred, not distorted, crisp, as if he belonged in the room. I bolted upright, fumbling for the lamp, but the cabin was empty. My chest ached from the force of my breathing. The mirror reflected only me, pale and wide-eyed. When I watched the video the next morning, the moment played back almost exactly as I remembered, until the figure appeared. Just as it came into view, the recording glitched. The screen went black for 2 full seconds, skipping the entire segment. When it resumed, the door was already open, the mirror empty. My hands shook as I replayed it again and again. The footage was clean until that instant, then corrupted beyond retrieval. I took it to security, desperate for a second pair of eyes. A young crew member named Josh leaned over the counter, his expression shifting from polite boredom to discomfort as he watched. But just as the figure should have appeared, the glitch swallowed the evidence. "Looks like a corrupted file," he said, forcing a smile. "Happens sometimes with older phones." I told him the phone wasn't old. I told him I'd seen it myself. He promised to forward the video to their internal system, but when I followed up later, they told me it hadn't transferred correctly. Gone. Erased mid-frame. That was when Serena appeared. Housekeeping, uniform crisp, eyes a shade too sharp for someone in customer service. She came to inspect the cabin, though she barely glanced around before muttering, almost under her breath, "This room hasn't been used in a long time, not since the incident." I froze. "What incident?" I pressed, but she avoided my eyes, busied herself with the sheets, and left without answering. Later, another staff member at the desk confirmed that the room had been unoccupied for nearly a year. His face was carefully blank, as though even that admission might have been too much. By then I couldn't sleep in there. Every creak in the walls felt like footsteps. Every groan of the hull felt like someone shifting their weight against the door. I switched cabins, insisting on a higher deck. The new room was sterile, bland, but blessedly quiet. For a few nights I slept, dreamless, heavy sleep. No creaking, no door, no mirror. I told myself it was over. I even laughed at my own paranoia, rehearsing how I'd tell Liam about it when I got home, how he'd tease me for seeing ghosts and reflections. But when I landed back in Los Angeles and opened my laptop at 1234 Maple Street, I found the corrupted file waiting for me in my cloud. The glitch was still there, but worse. Every time I opened the folder, the computer froze for a second, as if something were reaching through the circuitry to stop me. Once, for a split instant, the thumbnail preview showed not blackness but the faint outline of that gaunt man, head tilted, arms too long. Then it vanished again, replaced by a generic file icon. I tried transferring it to an external drive, but the system crashed mid-process. My phone did the same. Every attempt left me sweating, heart racing, convinced that what I was doing was not just impossible but forbidden. That word lodged itself in me. Forbidden. Not haunted, not glitched. Forbidden. Like the act of recording had crossed some boundary I shouldn't have known existed. I thought about Serena's eyes as she muttered her warning when I disembarked. You shouldn't have recorded it. Not, you shouldn't have seen it. Not, you shouldn't have stayed there. The crime wasn't witnessing. It was documenting, trying to carry proof into the daylight. And what unsettles me more than anything, even now, is the possibility that she wasn't warning me out of kindness. She was warning me like someone who knows the rules, knows the penalties, and knows that once you break them, something starts to follow. I don't tell Liam anymore. I don't tell anyone. I just keep the phone in a drawer, powered off, its corrupted file sitting there like a heartbeat. Sometimes at night I swear I can hear it. The faint hum I first noticed leaving Miami. Low, steady, vibrating in my chest. Sometimes I wake to find the bathroom door in my apartment ajar, though I know I closed it. Sometimes the mirror catches me at an angle where my head looks just slightly tilted, as though it's not quite attached. And sometimes when my phone freezes for a fraction too long, I feel the unmistakable sensation of being watched, not by an echo of the past, but by something that has learned how to exist in circuits, in glitches, in the fragile fabric of digital proof. The fear isn't of ghosts anymore. It's of digital footprints, of being observed not by the living or the dead, but by something that erases itself at the moment of discovery, leaving only silence and static in its wake. And the worst part, the part I can't escape, is knowing that it isn't gone. It's patient, it's waiting, and it already knows I'm watching. I knew something was off the moment I stepped into the hallway, though I couldn't have told you why. Maybe it was the air, the way it seemed just a little too still for a ship that was supposed to be bustling with life. Or maybe it was the way the carpet absorbed sound, muting every step so completely that when I turned back to see Lena behind me, her mouth moving as she joked about how tiny the cabin would probably be, I didn't hear a thing until she laughed. And even then, the sound seemed clipped, like the hallway itself swallowed half of it before it could reach me. That's what I mean when I say the unease started small, imperceptible at first, but once something has your attention, once it worms into your awareness, it never really leaves. It multiplies. I remember the exact moment because it was supposed to be one of the happiest stretches of my life. Married 9 days, on our honeymoon, carrying the exhaustion of wedding planning and family obligations and work deadlines like a stone backpack, but finally, able to set it down. The cruise was meant to be our reprieve, our floating sanctuary, a chance to disappear into the sea air, to leave behind the stress of Miami, the cramped one-bedroom apartment where dishes piled in the sink and laundry grew damp waiting for us to get home. I thought I needed the ocean, that it would rinse me clean. I didn't realize that silence and salt water can do the opposite. They can strip away the skin you thought was armor until all that's left is a body exposed. Our cabin was on deck 7, mid-tier, with the kind of balcony you can lean over but not spread your arms wide on. It was modest, but Lena was thrilled. She pressed her hands to the glass door, turned back to me, and said, "Can you believe this? We're actually here." Her smile was bright, unguarded, the kind that makes you forget the cost of things. I wanted to freeze her in that moment, bottle her joy like cologne so I could breathe it in whenever I felt small. Our neighbor appeared almost immediately, a man in his 60s, late 60s maybe, with the tan of someone who spent too much time in the sun but not enough on his health. His name was Richard, though he insisted, with a too-wide grin, that we call him Rick. He leaned over the balcony railing the way men like him lean into conversations, uninvited but not outright unwelcome, just present enough to force acknowledgement. He gave us unsolicited tips about the buffet lines and the entertainment schedule, waved off our polite nods with, "Trust me, you'll thank me later." His smile was wrong. I can't explain it better than that. It was the kind of smile that looks painted on after the fact, like a mask fitted to a face that didn't consent to it. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself Lena didn't notice, though I could tell she did by the way she avoided leaning too close to the shared railing. We laughed about it in bed, whispering our impressions like teenagers gossiping after a school dance. But when the lights went out and the hum of the ship filled the silence, I thought about his voice, how it had dropped when he said, "Cabins like ours, they're built to hear things if you're quiet enough." That was the first night we heard the pacing. It started softly, just a rhythm against the wall. 5 or 6 steps, a stop, 5 or 6 steps again. At first I thought it was Rick stretching his legs in his cabin, but the more I listened, the more it felt deliberate. Not restless, not casual, but patterned. I pressed my ear against the thin wall, felt the vibrations of his feet through the metal frame. Then the tapping began, light at first, like fingernails on glass, then more insistent. Lena squeezed my hand under the covers. "It's just the ship," I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The pacing went on for an hour. We reported it to a crew member the next morning, a young man named Liam whose smile was practiced in the way service workers' smiles often are. He said walls were thin, noises carried, nothing to worry about. We let it drop. We were on vacation. We didn't want to be the couple who spent their honeymoon filing complaints. But the next day, Lena found a pair of her underwear folded neatly on the balcony railing, the dividing line between our space and Rick's. Not a pair she had worn, a pair she hadn't even unpacked yet, black with pink trim. She went pale, her breath catching as she lifted the fabric between 2 fingers like it was radioactive. I checked her suitcase and sure enough the matching bra was still there, buried under a pile of dresses. We told ourselves it was a prank. A sick one, but a prank. Maybe some pervert on the housekeeping staff. Maybe a mistake. Maybe anything but what it felt like. An intrusion. That night, the pacing started earlier. Louder. The tapping grew frantic, not nails now, but knuckles, maybe even a fist against the wall. Muffled but intentional. Then whispers. Low, breathy, urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone was speaking to us through the wall, too soft to be understood, but too deliberate to be ignored. I knocked back. Silence. Not gradual silence. Immediate. Total. We slept with the lights on, a chair wedged against the door. At 3 in the morning, I heard the faint click of our doorknob, a metallic tremor that reverberated into my chest. Someone was testing it, turning it gently. Not enough to enter, but enough to remind us that the barrier between inside and out was thinner than we wanted to believe. The next morning, Rick was gone. His balcony was empty, his door closed. We didn't see him on the deck, in the buffet, at the shows. His absence was almost louder than his presence had been. But when we came back from dinner that night, our cabin door log showed 4 entries while we'd been gone. Our bags were unzipped, our clothes disturbed. My shaving kit was moved from the bathroom counter to the bed, opened as if someone had examined it piece by piece. Security came. They checked the logs. They said only 2 key cards had been used, ours and Rick's. But here's the part that made my stomach drop. They claimed the cabin next to us had been unoccupied since the start of the voyage. No one named Richard or Rick was assigned there. It was listed as empty. I showed them a photo Lena had taken on day 2. In the background, faint but visible, was an arm resting on the balcony railing. Rick's arm. The security officer squinted, shrugged, said maybe it was a trick of perspective. They opened the cabin next to ours to prove their point. It was empty, pristine, except for the faint smell of cologne lingering in the air, and a napkin taped behind the bathroom mirror with numbers scrawled on it, and a single word, observation. We asked to change cabins, they obliged. But for the rest of the cruise, I couldn't shake the feeling that moving cabins didn't matter. That whoever Rick was, he wasn't bound by walls or locks or key cards. That the real danger wasn't a man at all, but the fact that he could exist and not exist at the same time. Seen, documented, and then gone, leaving only evidence like fingerprints and dust. We got home. We changed our passwords. We threw out half our clothes. Lena still checks every lock 3 times before bed, and I don't argue. Sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I hear pacing. 5 or 6 steps, then a stop. 5 or 6 steps, again. I tell myself it's neighbors, pipes, anything but what it feels like. The fear isn't of a man in the room. The fear is of what it means when someone can slip so easily between spaces, watching, recording, rearranging, and then vanish. The fear is that maybe the ship was never the cage we thought it was. Maybe it was a stage. And maybe even now, Someone is standing just on the other side of the wall, whispering to see if I'll finally listen. I never meant to remember the cruise the way I do now. At the time, it seemed harmless enough, a week carved out of our lives to celebrate my younger brother's graduation. But from the very first night, before anything even happened, something gnawed at me, an impression I couldn't shake, like a word caught on the tip of my tongue or the faint smell of smoke you can't find the source of. It's only now, long after, that I realized that the unease was waiting for me, crouched in every shadow, listening from every corner, patient as the sea itself. Liam was the reason we were on that ship. He'd finished medical school in May, a culmination of years of obsessive dedication, and I had offered to treat him. A 7-day Caribbean cruise out of Port Canaveral, bright skies, salt wind, endless buffets. Liam deserved it. I told myself I did too. My work as a graphic designer had eaten me alive that spring, and I had become a shadow of myself, bleary-eyed at my computer, the world shrinking to the borders of my desk. I needed open water, sun on my face, the kind of freedom you can only fake by putting distance between yourself and everything you've left behind. Liam accepted with a quiet gratitude that felt almost embarrassed. That was his way, grateful but restrained, like he was already planning what would go wrong. Our father had instilled that in him. Caution, order, the belief that the worst could be prevented if you stayed vigilant. I, in contrast, was a man who wandered into days like unmarked rooms, assuming the walls would hold. The cabin we were assigned was an inside room on deck 8. No windows, only the suggestion of a world beyond its walls. It was clean enough, 2 narrow beds pressed to opposite walls, the kind of thin carpet that never really loses its smell of other people's feet, and a mirror fixed above a small desk. I told myself I liked the coziness, that we wouldn't spend much time there anyway. But by the second night, I noticed how wrong it felt to be sealed away from the ocean while sleeping on top of it. The air tasted faintly recycled, like breathing into your own cupped hands. The mirror reflected our movements, and more than once I found myself glancing into it, almost expecting something I didn't want to see. The first 2 days went exactly as they should have. Sunburned afternoons on deck chairs, bloated evenings at the buffet, late-night comedy acts where the laughter came easily enough. Liam smiled more than I'd seen him smile in years, and for once I thought maybe he had let go of his endless worrying. We met a few people, a couple from Chicago, a family with 2 small kids who adored Liam, but they remained background characters in what I thought was just a pleasant interlude in our lives. Then on the 3rd night, he saw the man. We were leaving the comedy club, light from the stage still clinging to our eyes, when Liam touched my arm. His hand was cold despite the heat of the room. "Don't look too fast," he whispered, and before I could ask, he nodded toward the back. A man stood leaning against the wall by the exit, late 50s, maybe older. His face sagged with the weight of exhaustion, as though sleep had eluded him for years. His left leg dragged slightly when he shifted, a limp that looked too permanent to be feigned. Nothing extraordinary in that. Cruise ships were filled with tired bodies and old injuries. But the way Liam stared, as though he'd glimpsed something obscene, unsettled me. "Okay," I said lightly. "He's just a guy." Liam didn't answer. He kept watching until we stepped into the corridor, then shook his head. I saw him earlier. Pool deck, buffet line too, always alone. His voice had an edge to it, clipped and tight. "So what? Maybe he's traveling solo." But Liam's jaw clenched, and I saw the beginning of something I didn't yet understand. The days that followed spiraled slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a boat taking on water beneath the surface. Liam's attention snagged on that man again and again. At breakfast, his eyes would flick toward the door. At the pool, he scanned every lounger. When the man appeared, and he always did somehow, Liam's posture tightened, his breath shallowed, and his hand would grip my arm with bruising insistence. "He's following us," Liam whispered once, his eyes fever-bright. "You're imagining things," I said, though the words lacked conviction. The truth was, I had started to notice it too. Wherever we went, the man wasn't far behind. Not always close, but present, at the far end of the buffet, leaning on the railing above the pool, sitting alone at the edge of the comedy club, his limp more pronounced when he rose to leave. By the fifth night, the tension broke. We were in the casino, the air heavy with cigarette smoke that shouldn't have been there. Ships outlawed it now, but the smell clung like a ghost. Liam sat at a blackjack table, hands restless on his chips, when I saw his face blanch. I followed his gaze. There, in the corner by a row of slot machines, stood the man. He wasn't playing, just watching, his eyes fixed on Liam as though he'd been waiting for him. Liam froze, his cards slipping from his fingers. His lips parted, but no sound came. I leaned in, trying to anchor him. "Hey, it's fine. It's nothing." But he shook his head violently. "He's always watching." His whisper was shredded with fear. I looked again at the man. His expression was unreadable until, slowly, deliberately, he smiled. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't amusement. It was the kind of smile that suggested knowledge, ownership. My stomach turned cold. Liam gasped suddenly, clutching his chest. For a heartbeat, I thought he was dying right there, that I was about to lose him on a carpeted floor beneath the fluorescent hum. His breaths came shallow, desperate, a panic attack. I grabbed him, half-guided, half-dragged him from the casino, ignoring the stares that followed us. In the cabin, he lay trembling in his bed, sweat dampening the sheets. His eyes darted to the mirror, then away, as though afraid of what might reflect. I stayed with him until his breathing steadied, though his silence was worse than his panic. He didn't speak a word the rest of the night. The next morning, when Liam finally slept, I went to guest services. I gave them the description: late 50s, limp, tired face. The woman behind the desk typed briskly, her professionalism unshaken. Then she looked at me, neutral, but something in her eyes faltered. "Sir," she said carefully, "there is no one on board matching that description." I blinked. "Are you sure? He's everywhere. My brother. He even took a photo." I fumbled for my phone, pulled up the picture Liam had snapped by the pool. The man was there, leaning against the railing, face turned slightly away but visible enough. She studied it for a long moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "That's not possible. He's not on the manifest. He doesn't have a cabin." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "Could he be a stowaway?" She shook her head. "Stowaways don't have access to guest areas. They don't blend in at the casino. That's not how it works." I returned to the cabin, shaken. Liam sat upright, blanket wrapped around his shoulders, eyes wide and bloodshot. When I told him, he didn't look surprised. "I knew it," he said, voice low and hollow. "He's not real, but he was real. I had seen him. I had smelled the smoke in the casino, felt the weight of his gaze. The unease twisted into something darker, something like dread. We didn't leave the cabin for the rest of the trip. Meals went uneaten. Curtains we didn't have might as well have been drawn. Liam stared at the mirror often, then flinched from it, as though expecting that tired face to grin back. I tried to read, to sleep, to distract myself, but the air in that cabin thickened day by day, pressing on my chest. At night, when I closed my eyes, I felt certain that if I opened them, he'd be standing at the foot of my bed. The cruise ended, as all things do. We disembarked, hollow-eyed, and I told myself it was over. Back in our apartment in Fort Lauderdale, the walls felt safer, the windows reassuring. I convinced myself that Liam had been unraveling under stress, that I'd been pulled into his delusion. I told myself stories about exhaustion, about paranoia, about tricks of memory. Then the package arrived. A small box, unmarked, waiting on our doorstep. Inside, a single photograph, black and white, grainy. The man with the limp, standing on the deck of a ship, facing the camera, grinning. His eyes were pits of knowing. On the back, one word, scrawled in black ink, Witness. I held it until my hands shook, until the edges cut into my skin, and that's when the truth hollowed me out completely. Because the fear isn't of ghosts or of madness, or even of Liam's fragile mind. It's of a man who can exist without a name, who can slip between manifests and rooms and lives, who knows when you've seen him, and who makes sure you know he sees you too. And now, every mirror I pass, every reflection in a window, every shadow in a crowd, I expect him. I wait for the limp, for the grin, for the reminder that once you've been chosen as witness, there is no going back. No. I didn't notice it at first. The way the air on the ship seemed different from the air on land. Thicker somehow, metallic, with a faint undertone that reminded me of dust burning on old wires. It wasn't unpleasant, not exactly, but I remember thinking that even the sea breeze, sharp and briny when we stood out on the deck, felt as if it had passed through something before reaching my lungs. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that I hadn't really slept in months, even before Claire and I boarded the cruise. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of fatigue, an occupational hazard of my profession. But looking back, I think it began there, with that first slow breath aboard the ship, when something invisible curled down into me and didn't let go. I'm Marcus, and my life has always been measured in vibrations. The bow against the string, the echo in a hall, the resonance of wood shaped to amplify sorrow and joy in equal measure. I play the cello. It's not just my career. It's the lens through which I've always understood the world. My hands know the difference between a note pulled too harshly and one trembling on the edge of silence. And that's how I knew, from the very first night on board, that something was off, even when everything else appeared perfectly fine. Claire and I had chosen the cruise as a reprieve after a relentless 6-month tour with the Philadelphia Philharmonic. The tour was good for my career, but hell on my nerves. 40 cities, 2 continents, 3 conductors, endless applause that felt hollow in my chest by the end. I had started waking at night with my heart racing, even when all I could hear was silence. So when Claire suggested we take a break, a real one, far from concert halls and dressing rooms and endless rehearsals, I agreed. 7 days at sea, no deadlines, no baton dictating the rise and fall of my breath. Just water in every direction and Claire's hand in mine. Our cabin was on deck 4, close to the engine room. Most people hated that level. It was noisy, dimly lit, smelled faintly of grease. But I loved it. The low, steady vibration of the ship was like a bass line under everything, constant and grounding. Each night as Claire curled against me, I let that hum seep into me like a lullaby. It was the closest I'd come in months to peace. The first 3 days passed without incident. Sun-warmed mornings on the upper deck, too much food at dinner, Claire's laughter echoing in the wide, windowed dining room. I let myself believe this might be what healing felt like. My body loosened. I even caught myself humming as we walked the halls. But on the 4th night, something woke me. It was subtle at first, almost drowned by the engine's drone, but it cut across the hum in a way I recognized instantly. The drawn-out, deliberate stroke of a bow across a string. A cello. My instrument. My sound. I sat upright, pulse hammering. Claire stirred beside me. "What is it?" she mumbled, half asleep. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. She sighed and rolled away, already slipping back under. But I was wide awake, every nerve attuned. The note was clear now, a C-sharp, sustained with a pressure I knew intimately. It wasn't a recording. No recording breathes like that. No recording carries the tiny imperfections of human hands. This was live. Next door. I slipped from the bed and pressed my ear against the wall. The sound came through steady, aching, followed by silence that felt heavier than the note itself. Then again, C-sharp, drawn long, sorrowful. I knocked, soft at first, then louder. The playing stopped. The next morning, while Claire was showering, I asked a staff member about the cabin next door. He gave me a polite but puzzled look. "That room's empty, sir. Has been since we left port." I forced a laugh. "Strange. Thought I heard music." He smiled, but his eyes lingered on me as if assessing whether I was joking. That night, it started again. Not just one note this time. A melody. Fragmented, incomplete, but threaded with grief so raw it cut straight through me. I recognized the contour of the line but couldn't place it, as though it belonged to a memory I'd half forgotten. I pressed closer to the wall, heart rattling against my ribs. "Marcus," Claire muttered behind me, her voice thick with sleep. "Come back to bed, please." "You don't hear this?" "There's nothing. You're overtired. Just please." I wanted to believe her. I lay awake long after the music ceased, staring into the dark, the engine's hum suddenly louder, lonelier. The next day I went to the ship's library, a cramped room lined with old magazines and mismatched books. I didn't know what I was looking for until I found it. An old newspaper clipping laminated inside a binder of ship history. A fire, early 2000s. Dozens injured. One death. A cellist. Elias Vance. A guest lecturer, famed for his melancholic interpretations of the romantic repertoire. He'd given a farewell performance in the lounge hours before the fire. They found him in his cabin on deck 4, slumped over his instrument, sheet music at his side. His cello was ruined, charred beyond recognition, but the notes survived. His last composition. I stared at the printed staff lines. The melody matched exactly what I had heard. When night came, I didn't knock. I didn't move. I let it wash through me, the melody complete now, unfolding with unbearable weight. It filled the room as tangibly as cold air, wrapping around my chest. I pulled out my phone, pressed record, held it against the wall. The music climbed, twisted, reached a crescendo so sharp it felt like my own ribs were the strings being bowed. Then silence. In the morning, I played the recording back. Nothing. Just static, layered over the low thrum of the engines. No melody. No final note. I didn't tell Claire about the article. She already looked at me with unease I hadn't seen before, as though gauging whether the man beside her was the same one she'd married. Her patience wore thinner each time I mentioned the music. She'd start to answer, then stop, as if afraid anything she said might push me further into obsession. But obsession had already set in. By the 6th night, the melody no longer waited for darkness. I caught echoes of it in the dining room, in the stairwells, woven into the ocean wind when we stood at the railing. Sometimes, in conversation, Claire's words faltered mid-sentence, and in the pause, I swore I heard a faint, quivering note beneath her voice. I stopped sleeping. Every sound was suspect. The ship's hum grew oppressive, masking and revealing the music in turn. I pressed my ear to walls, to floors, to the hollow curve of my own cello case, though I had left the instrument itself back in Philadelphia. My hands ached to play, to pull the melody from wood and string, to answer whatever called to me. But I knew if I did, something irreversible would happen. Claire begged me to see the ship's doctor. I told her I was fine. I smiled, practiced normalcy, but in my mind, I was tracing the contour of that melody again and again, convinced if I could just follow it to its end, I would understand. The 7th night came, our final night before docking. I lay awake, waiting. The first note came soft as breath, then another and another, until the room itself vibrated with the force of it. I pressed record again, though I knew it was useless. The melody rose, spiraled, built to the inevitable peak. But this time, it didn't end. It shifted, broadened, became something new. I couldn't breathe. My chest constricted as if invisible hands pressed against me. I stumbled to the wall, palms flat against it, desperate to anchor myself. The wood beneath my skin thrummed as if alive, as if the ship itself had become the instrument. "Marcus!" Claire's voice sharp with fear, her hands on my shoulders pulling me back, but I couldn't turn away. The final phrase swelled, unbearable, radiant with despair. And then, silence. When I came to, the cabin was still. Claire sat across from me, eyes red, mouth tight. She didn't speak. She just watched me, as if waiting for something. The recording on my phone was blank, just static. We disembarked the next morning. Claire didn't hold my hand. Back home, my cello waits in its case. I haven't touched it. I can't. Because the melody lingers in me, dormant but alive. And I know if I draw a bow across string, it will return. And I don't know if I'll survive hearing how it ends. The cruise was supposed to be a reward. The bright exhale after years of inhaling textbooks and caffeine and pressure at Arizona State. I remember standing at the edge of the dock in Fort Lauderdale, the Florida heat slick on my skin, and staring up at the ship like it was a floating skyscraper. Thousands of windows stared back, some already glowing, and I felt an almost childlike thrill climb my ribs. My best friend Maya was already laughing, dragging her suitcase toward the ramp, while I lingered with that strange mix of awe and hesitation. That's how we were. She moved forward without looking. I always looked twice. The air smelled of salt and sunblock, a cocktail of freedom, and for the first time in months I felt lighter. The cabin was smaller than the brochure made it look, but we didn't care. Tight, cozy, with a mirrored closet door that doubled the room until it felt like we'd stepped into a funhouse. Maya flopped on the bed, already posting a picture while I tried to unpack with order, my fingers smoothing each folded shirt as if control over my belongings meant control over the week. The mirror made me pause, though. Something about the way it reflected the bed, an angle that exaggerated the depth of the space until I almost thought there was another version of us in there, living the same vacation with a half-second delay. I shook it off. A trick of light. A fun house is meant to be fun. That first night was a blur of rum punches, neon lights, and laughter too loud to be entirely real. We stumbled down hushed hallways long past midnight, the air conditioning making the ship's heartbeat colder than the decks outside. Maya kicked the door shut behind us, locked it with a snap, and laughed when I glanced back, as though the silence outside might push its way in. It became routine almost immediately. Her locking the door, me double-checking it. In strange places, the smallest rituals matter. The second night, I woke to cold air licking across my face. My eyes opened to a sliver of light from the hallway, spilling across the floor. The door was cracked open. My body froze before my mind even fully caught up. My first instinct was that Maya had gone to the bathroom, but she was asleep, breathing deep and slow in the other bed. I moved quietly, each step taut with dread, and pushed the door shut. I locked it again, stood there in the dark, with a knot so tight in my stomach it felt alive. I lay awake the rest of the night, eyes flicking between the mirror and the faint outline of the door. The next day I noticed my bracelet was gone. A cheap one, but mine. I knew I'd set it on the nightstand. Maya waved it off, said I'd probably left it in my suitcase or dropped it during the night. But her laughter sounded thinner than usual. I started taking pictures of my things before bed. My phone charger coiled in its place, my wallet zipped shut, the hair tie beside it. Proof that I wasn't just imagining. By the fourth night, I was on high alert. I zipped my purse, locked the door myself, and wedged one of Maya's sneakers against it, rubber sole pressed firm into the carpet. A simple test. We went to a late-night movie on the upper deck, and when we came back, the sneaker had shifted. Just a few inches, but enough. I stared at it, my heart a drum in my ears, while Maya muttered something about turbulence, but the ship barely moved under our feet. I didn't sleep. At 2 a.m, I heard it. The soft metallic click, the doorknob turning, slow, deliberate. My lungs clamped shut. I stared into the dark, every nerve straining. The knob stopped. The door didn't open. But when I dared to move, dared to flick on the bathroom light, the sneaker was on the other side of the room. I told Maya everything in a rush the next morning, my words tripping over each other. She was pale, quiet, and then she admitted her headphones had gone missing too. We went straight to guest services, voices lowered like children whispering confessions. The woman at the desk was professional, her tone smooth, but her eyes flickered, something too quick, too controlled. She offered to move us. No fuss. Within 20 minutes we were in a different cabin, 2 floors up, our suitcases half-zipped and belongings gathered in nervous handfuls. The next morning, we went back for what Maya had forgotten. The cleaning crew was already inside. I walked in first. On the pillow of my old bed lay my missing bracelet, coiled neatly like a snake waiting to strike. My legs locked. Maya stopped in the doorway, her silence louder than any scream. It had been gone for days, and now it was waiting for me. The cleaning lady shook her head when I asked. She hadn't found it. She didn't know how it got there. She looked away too quickly. Later, security called me. Their digital logs showed no entries for our room other than ours. No master key, no employee access, nothing. I asked if a bypass was possible, my voice trembling despite myself, and the guard was quiet for just long enough to tell me more than words could. Then he said, polite and firm, that it wasn't supposed to be possible. He thanked me and hung up. After that, we avoided the cabin during the day. We filled our time with shows and drinks and excursions, but something had cracked between us. The silence in the room was louder than the noise outside it. Maya's laughter dulled into habit. My eyes twitched toward the mirror every time I passed. I started to wonder if sleep was safe, or if it was just surrender. I thought about the door opening, about the knob turning with intention, about the sneaker crossing the room without a sound. Every small absence in the cabin, every misplaced item, was a question I couldn't answer. When the ship finally docked, I walked off with relief sharp enough to hurt. On the last morning before we left, I placed the bracelet back on the pillow. I couldn't take it with me. I didn't want to. Some objects don't belong to you anymore once they've been touched. Maya said nothing. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, something between understanding and fear. And then she walked away. I never saw her again. Now, when I think about that cruise, I don't think about the missing things or the cabin change. I think about the doorknob turning with patient precision, the breathless pause on the other side, the way someone, or something, waited in silence as if savoring the knowledge of me awake and afraid. I think about the bracelet laid out like an offering, or a claim, and I wonder, if there were no logs, no entries, no evidence of intrusion, then maybe there was no intruder at all. Maybe it wasn't about someone getting in. Maybe it was about something that never left. The fear that lingers isn't of strangers on the other side of a locked door. It's of presences woven into places, silent watchers who slip between moments and make themselves known not through force but through deliberate, quiet violation. It's of safety that shatters without sound. And the worst part, the part that gnaws at me still, isn't the idea that it happened once. It's the unshakable certainty that it could happen anywhere, again without warning, and I would never know until it was already too late. The first night I couldn't sleep. It wasn't because of the hum of the engines beneath the floor or the thin walls that carried every cough, every drunken laugh from the hallway. It was the silence that crept in when all those sounds finally dimmed. That silence wasn't restful. It pressed in on me, like a presence that wanted to be acknowledged. I'd booked this cruise to escape, to recover, to disappear from the stale air of my apartment back in Boston. But as I lay on the narrow bed staring at the faint red light above the balcony door, I had the distinct, irrational sense that the silence itself was listening. By day, the ship felt safe, even comforting in its manufactured cheer. I let the sun peel away the stress from my skin, let the sugary drinks soften the edges of my thoughts. I walked the decks, breathed in the salt, heavy wind, convinced myself that the ocean could absorb the grief of the last year, the divorce, the long nights spent counting shadows on my ceiling, the way the walls of my apartment seemed to close in tighter every day. Out here, with water in every direction, I felt suspended, untethered, and that freedom was seductive. But it didn't last. On the third evening, after wandering past the neon-soaked bars and karaoke spillover, I found the casino. It was mostly empty, its carpet patterned in dizzying swirls of green and gold, the overhead lights buzzing faintly. A lone staff member with a thick beard and a bow tie too tight around his neck nodded at me as I slid into a seat at a penny slot. The machine blinked with cartoonish cherries and bells, its cheerfulness so forced it almost mocked me. I wasn't playing for money, not really. I wanted to feel my hands occupied, my mind lulled. When the reels aligned and a cascade of electronic bells signaled a win, just a few dollars, it startled me more than it pleased me. The attendant appeared at my side with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Lucky night," he said softly, as though luck had anything to do with it. I went back to my cabin feeling oddly exposed, as though his eyes had lingered too long, as though the win had marked me. I undressed slowly, watching my reflection in the mirror, half reassured, half repulsed by the body that was mine alone now. The curtains were drawn halfway, the sea outside black and endless. I remember thinking just before I slipped into sleep how beautiful it was to be unseen. But in the morning, I woke to the sound of something soft sliding against the carpet, an envelope. I tore it open expecting a promotion for another show or excursion, but inside was a glossy photo. The sight of it rooted me in place. It was me, standing half naked in the cabin, unhooking my bra, the TV behind me glowing faintly. The composition was precise, unmistakable, as if someone had been perched high in the corner, recording. I felt the air collapse in my lungs. My first instinct was denial. This couldn't be my room, couldn't be me. But the cheap necklace around my neck, the reflection of the muted screen, the pale line across my stomach from lying too long in the sun, it was all there. I tore the cabin apart, frantic, my hands shaking as I yanked open drawers, pressed against the mirror, crouched low to peer under the bed. Then my gaze caught on the small black dome in the ceiling corner, the one I'd thought was a motion detector. Now, in the morning light, the faint ring of red around the lens glowed unmistakably. I don't remember the walk to guest services, only the weight of the photo burning against my palm. The woman at the desk looked at it, and in the span of a heartbeat, her polite mask cracked. She excused herself, and when she returned, she wasn't alone. A man in a dark blazer introduced himself as Eric from security. He led me into a windowless room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. He spoke in careful tones, explaining that there had been a technical issue, that a crew member had managed to reroute certain camera feeds. He used words like unauthorized and isolated incident, but then he opened a gray folder and slid it across the table. Inside were more photos, not of me, but of other women, all caught in moments meant to be private, dressing, crying, lying still in sleep. Their vulnerability made my stomach turn. Eric didn't name the culprit, but when I asked if it was the bearded casino attendant, he looked down at the folder. The silence was answer enough. They offered me a refund, a future cruise credit, and papers to sign. My hand moved mechanically, scratching my name across the non-disclosure form, though my vision blurred with anger and shame. I told myself I just wanted off the ship, away from that suffocating sense of being observed. But when the plane lifted off the runway the next morning, carrying me back toward Boston, the relief didn't come. The image of that red-lit dome in the corner of the ceiling followed me. Back home, the silence of my apartment felt sharper than before. Every creak of the pipes, every flicker of the streetlight outside seemed amplified. I found myself scanning corners, the tops of door frames, the smoke detector in the hallway. My therapist called it situational paranoia, a reasonable response to a traumatic breach of privacy. She said it would fade with time. I nodded and smiled and tried to believe her, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glossy fold of the photo, the way it captured me, mid-motion, unguarded. I locked it in a drawer, but that didn't stop me from thinking about it. At night, when the radiator ticked, I imagined hidden lenses catching the rhythm of my sleep. When I undressed, I avoided mirrors, afraid they weren't reflecting so much as recording. I couldn't stop replaying the look in that attendant's eyes, the quiet certainty in his smile when he said I was lucky. Lucky, as though my small jackpot had bought me more than coins. Lucky, as though I'd stepped into a role in a performance I hadn't agreed to. The dread didn't fade. It deepened. Walking down the street, I'd catch the reflection of a camera lens in a shop window and feel exposed. At night, the dark of my bedroom wasn't empty. It was crowded with the possibility of eyes. I began to wonder if the photo in my drawer was the only copy. I began to imagine a hidden audience, faceless and vast, watching reels of women like me, stitched together in some unseen archive. An archive curated not for money, not even for lust, but for control, the thrill of owning moments that should never belong to anyone else. Weeks blurred. The therapist's words grew hollow. Friends invited me out, but their chatter, their laughter, felt distant, unreal. I wanted to tell them, but how could I? How could I explain the way it feels to doubt the sanctity of your own solitude? How do you put into words the suspicion that your life isn't yours, that you're part of an elaborate script written for someone else's amusement? One night, unable to sleep, I pulled the photo from the drawer. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. I expected the image to be static, frozen, but in that dim light it seemed to breathe. My shoulders hunched, my hair falling forward, my skin catching the reflection of the TV. I thought of myself not as a woman, but as a character, posed and framed. And then I noticed something I hadn't before. In the reflection of the darkened balcony glass, faint but unmistakable, was a figure, a silhouette, standing where no one should have been. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a distortion, but once seen, it couldn't be unseen. That shadow confirmed what I'd feared all along. It wasn't just a camera. It wasn't just one man. There was presence in that room with me. Now, as I sit here writing this, I can feel the weight of unseen eyes. Maybe they never left the ship. Maybe they followed me home. Maybe they were always here. I can't tell anymore where the performance ends and where my life begins. What I know is this: the silence isn't empty. It listens, it waits, it records. And when I turn out the lights tonight, I'll see the red glow again, waiting patiently in the corner, ready for me to play my part. Because the true horror isn't that they watched. It's that I can't stop wondering if I was meant to be watched all along. I never told anyone this part, not even my mother, though she was there for most of it. She lived through the same trip, walked the same halls, and slept in the same cabin. But what she remembers and what I remember don't align. Maybe that's the safest way to say it. What's real and what isn't? There's no clean line for me anymore. And yet I know what I felt. I know what I saw. And I know I was chosen, in a way that feels less like luck and more like a life sentence. The first night on the ship, I couldn't sleep. The mattress was fine, the air conditioning a steady hum, my mother already breathing in that slow rhythm that said she had surrendered to the rocking of the waves. But my mind wouldn't stop rattling. There was a faint vibration under everything, like the pulse of the engines ran directly into the bones of the bed frame. Even when I closed my eyes, I could feel it. The ship alive, pressing its heartbeat into me. My mother had found a last-minute deal, 7 days looping through the Gulf, and I'd agreed because I was between jobs, drifting. But already, as the water pushed against the hull and the room swayed gently, I felt the mistake like a stone in my gut. I didn't belong out there. The sea was too wide, too empty. There was no control once you stepped aboard. You surrendered yourself to something enormous, something indifferent. By the third night, I had found a rhythm of my own, lying awake until after 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, tracing the thin seam of light that bled under the door from the hallway. That night was when I first heard it. The sound was faint, but distinct. Footsteps. Not heavy, not clumsy, but precise. Click, click, click. Like high heels striking a polished floor. They started faint at the far end of the corridor and advanced slowly, unhurried, deliberate. At first I thought it was just a late passenger heading back to their room. But when the steps stopped directly outside our door and lingered there, everything inside me tightened. I held my breath, waiting for a knock. Nothing came. Just silence pressing against the door. I slid out of bed, careful not to wake my mother, and leaned my face toward the peephole. Empty hallway. Not even a shadow. I stayed there until my legs ached, staring into nothing, and finally returned to bed, my pulse refusing to slow. It happened again the next night. Same time, same sound, same pause in front of our door, and again, no one there when I checked. The corridor was long, straight, with no alcoves, no places to hide. Whoever it was either disappeared the instant I opened the door, or had never been there at all. The second explanation was worse somehow. By the fifth night, my exhaustion had turned sharp, almost electric. I wasn't sleeping more than 2 or 3 hours at a stretch, and paranoia had seeped into every thought. That night, I didn't wait for the footsteps to stop. I was ready, crouched in the dark, hand on the knob. The moment the rhythm reached our door, I yanked it open so hard it banged against the wall. For an instant, the corridor looked normal, stretching empty under the dim yellow lights. Then movement at the far end caught my eye. A figure gliding toward the crew-only stairwell. She was dressed in a navy blue uniform, sharp-collared, the kind you'd see in an airline advertisement from the 1960s. A stiff cap, hair pinned back. She didn't walk so much as drift. The way her body shifted too smooth, too precise, as though she wasn't entirely subject to gravity. The click of heels that had woken me was gone. Her feet made no sound at all. And then the crew door swung shut behind her. I went to guest services the next morning, my voice sounding foreign in my own ears as I tried to explain. The woman behind the counter furrowed her brow. "No, sir. No one on staff wore uniforms like that. No, sir. That stairwell had been sealed off for years. It wasn't in use." She was polite but firm, her smile too practiced. When I asked her to send someone with me to check, she suggested maybe I'd been dreaming, or maybe another guest had been in costume for the themed cocktail event that evening. But she couldn't explain the door. I had seen it close. I knew what I had seen. That afternoon, I caught one of the crew in the hallway and asked about the stairwell. His expression shifted, quick as a shutter click. First neutral, then irritated, then quickly neutral again. He said it wasn't open to passengers, it was sealed, just storage. His tone ended the conversation before I could ask more. But that night, lying awake in the dark, I couldn't stop thinking of the way his eyes had flicked to the door as he spoke, like a nervous tick, like he was afraid of being overheard. I started counting the hours until 2 a.m., waiting for the steps. When they came, I let them reach the door and stop. The silence that followed pressed against my ears until I could hear my own blood in my head. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And when I finally cracked the door, faster this time, the hallway was empty. But the faint smell of something lingered. Old perfume. Powdery. Cloying. My mother stirred in her bed, mumbling in her sleep. And I wondered if she heard it too. If she'd ever admit it, even if she did. On the last day of the trip, when the air was already heavy with the stale smell of luggage and departure, my mother pulled out an old photo album. She'd brought it for nostalgia, to show me pictures from our first family cruise back in 1994. As I flipped through the yellowing prints, one image snagged my attention. Behind a lifeboat, half out of focus, was a figure. A woman in a long navy blue uniform, stiff collar, small cap. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't even moving. She stood stiffly, head tilted, hands clasped in front of her waist, watching. The photo was decades old, from a different ship entirely. But I knew her. The uniform, the posture, the way she held herself like a mannequin almost waiting to be animated. I said nothing to my mother. I slid the photo back under the protective plastic sleeve and shut the album. My pulse pounded behind my eyes. That night, in our last hours aboard, I didn't even bother trying to sleep. I sat in the dark, staring at the door, waiting for the rhythm to return. When it did, I let it reach me. I didn't move. I didn't open the door. I just sat there, listening, aware that whoever she was, whatever she was, she knew I was awake and she wanted me to know she knew. The clicking stopped. The silence pressed in, and I felt, as clearly as the cold metal of the knob under my hand, that this was never about threat. It was about recognition. She wasn't there to harm me. She was there to check, to confirm, to make sure I was the one who saw. That's the part I can't shake, that she was supposed to be seen, that I was supposed to be the one to see her. And now that I have, it doesn't feel finished. It feels like the first move of something larger, something that hasn't ended just because I left the ship. I've tried every rational explanation, and none of them fit, which means the only explanation left is the one I can't live with, that she's still out there, watching, waiting, patient as the tide, and that she won't stop until whatever she was checking for has been confirmed, until I've fulfilled whatever it is she needed me to see. And when that moment comes, I don't think I'll have the choice to look away.